Welcome, everyone. A very, very warm welcome to you all. I'm Cynthia Lazaroff, and I welcome you all this morning from the island of Kauai. With gratitude from this land, I'm blessed to steward beneath Kalalea, the mountain sacred to the Hawaiian people, the original stewards of this land, where all the souls enter the earth. Thank you, each and every one of you who are joining us from across many time zones around the world for our very special program on Indigenous wisdom, the Nuclear Ban Treaty, and activism to transform our nuclear legacy. Looking at registration this morning, you join us from 17 countries, including 6 of the 9 nuclear armed states. Thank you so much for caring. Thank you so much for being here. We're honored to have with us today 4 extraordinary women, all dedicated to transforming our nuclear legacy. Marian Naranjo, Ambassador Elayne Whyte Gomez, Shannon Biggs, and Susi Snyder. I want to express my gratitude to the Plowshares Fund Women's Initiative for their generous support in making this program possible. Plowshares has been leading the quest to eliminate nuclear weapons since they got started 40 years ago. And Plowshares founder, Sally Lilienthal, dedicated her life and heart and soul to this. We wouldn't be here without Sally, and we wouldn't be here without Plowshares. Now I'd like to welcome my dear friend and teacher, beloved elder in our community on Kauai, Kumu Hula Puna Dawson, who will open our session today with a blessing for peace. Puna travels the world, sharing the spirit of aloha, building bridges of peace between the peoples of other countries and the peoples of the Hawaiian Islands. Aloha and welcome, dear Auntie. Thank you so much for being here with us. I welcome you now to share your blessing.
Aloha, everyone. I want to say that the blessing is that we're present. I know for everyone who's on this gathering that we had to jump through hoops to get here, especially you, Susi. I don't know how many times you attempted this, but that tells us how important it is, the work that you're doing, we're all doing. That no matter what comes in front of us, behind us, around us, to prevent us from getting to our goal or to our intention, in Hawaiian thought, it's called pule, yeah, to come together with one thought, to come together with one intention. This is what we are all about. And so things fall in front of us to stop us, but it allows us to take the time to reevaluate how important it is that we're doing. And most especially, it reminds us to be thankful for the abundance of kindness that we all hold. Because without this kindness, our ability to do what we do would not happen. It's man who is being kind. And so I take the time to influence the thought of everything that you do by having you recognize yourself first. Akahai is to be kind, and you must be kind to yourself. It is only from that abundance are you able to share kindness with everyone that comes into your scope or into your alo. So I remind us all to be kind and be thoughtful to ourselves first. And through that thoughtfulness, our ability to be caring people for the world, because we are part of this one world, our ability to share kindness comes from this, comes from each one of us. What's even more important is to understand that in order for us to be a part of all that will happen, we need to recognize ourselves as a people who are of one breath. So I say to all of us, please breathe into our hands. Everyone lift your hands, breathe into your hands. Lift that up and bless the world with our breath. Now all of us are one family because we're all sharing breath. In that word aloha, that's exactly what we do. We open our hearts, our space, to the breath of one another. In being aloha and understanding that we as one people can be the caregivers and caretakers of not just each other, but everyone that comes into our scope or our alo. Being Hawaiian, as all of you are, as we are, is sharing that kuleana or responsibility, being one family of the earth. So I say to all of us, akahai, lokahi, olu olu, ha'aha'a, ahonui. Mahalo, aloha.
Mahalo, Auntie. Thank you for that beautiful blessing to bring us into this space together today. So grateful to you. While UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres sounds the alarm on the climate emergency as a code red for humanity, many of the world's top nuclear experts are sounding the code red alarm on nuclear dangers. US former Secretary of Defense William Perry told me in an interview that today we're at a greater risk of a nuclear catastrophe than we were during the Cold War, and that we're sleepwalking into a nuclear catastrophe and we must wake up. So in this code red moment for humanity, I ask myself pretty much every day, what can we do that would be game changing? With this question in mind, in this sacred space that Auntie Puna has just welcomed us all into, I'm really excited that we're going to be going on a different kind of journey today. We're going to go back to the place where the poison fire was first created. Marian Naranjo will guide us into a deeper exploration of the impact of nuclear weapons and Los Alamos National Laboratory, located within the sacred ancestral lands of the Pueblo people. With Marian, we'll go deep into the question of how do we enter into right relationship with each other on this land, with Mother Earth, and come to a deeper understanding of the indigenous wisdom that Earth is our teacher, that what we do to the Earth, we do to ourselves, to all life, and to generations yet unborn. We'll then look at 3 game-changing strategies for entering into right relationship. First, Shannon Biggs will introduce us to rights of nature, a new legal framework grounded in the spiritual instructions that have come through to Indigenous peoples about how we are to live in balance, harmony, and reciprocity with the sacred system of life, based on the recognition of the rights of Mother Earth that is being implemented in Indigenous communities around the world. With Shannon, we'll explore the application of rights of nature to stop further harm from nuclear weapons in places like Los Alamos and beyond. Next, Susi Snyder will walk us through the Nobel Peace Prize winning ICANN's divestment campaign strategy. Susi will offer us a step-by-step program, concrete ways we can personally come into right relationship by divesting, taking our money away from the banks that fund the companies that produce nuclear weapons. We'll see that many of the same biggest offender banks funding nuclear weapons are the same biggest offender banks funding fossil fuels, and how abundantly clear it is that spending on nuclear weapons needs to be divested and reinvested in climate, environmental, racial, and economic justice, the pandemic, healthcare, education, and so many of the other urgent issues that are all calling for our attention. We'll explore the intersectionality of nuclear weapons with these other issues, and in the spirit of what could be truly game-changing, imagine how we in the nuclear abolition movement might come together with our brothers and sisters in the climate justice and other movements and unify strategically with one heart and one mind in the spirit of what Auntie Puna just said, into a movement that will embrace all and be unstoppable. May it be so. Finally, we'll welcome Ambassador Elayne Whyte Gomez back to look at how we can come into right relationship through the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, also known as the Nuclear Ban Treaty and the TPNW, which for me is the greatest ray of light and hope in this work. Ambassador Whyte presided over the negotiations for the treaty at the UN in 2017. And the TPNW is the first nuclear weapons treaty based on humanitarian, not military law, the first to recognize the disproportionate impact of nuclear weapons on Indigenous peoples, the first to recognize the disproportionate impact on women and girls due to ionizing radiation, the first to provide compensation for victims of nuclear use and testing, as well as environmental remediation, and finally, the first to ban and make nuclear weapons illegal. In her compelling new book, Cassandra Speaks, best-selling author Elizabeth Lesser says, when women are the storytellers, the human story changes. Excluding women, half of the human race, from nuclear decision-making and policy-making for much of the nuclear age has brought us to the brink of possible extinction. We're here today because it's an existential imperative that we write a new nuclear story, and the four remarkable women we have with us today are all doing just that, each in her own way, doing path-breaking work, taking game-changing action to change our human story. With that, it's my honor to welcome and introduce our first mentor speaker, Marian Naranjo. Marian is the founder and director of Honor Our Pueblo Existence, HOPE, a community-based organization located at Santa Clara Pueblo in New Mexico. Marian has been working for over 25 years on environmental and health issues focused on the presence of Los Alamos National Laboratory, which is located within the sacred lands of the Pueblo people. Marian, in the short time that I've known you, now I think just about a month, I've learned so much, and I'm so grateful. You've touched my heart, moved me to tears with your story, your courage, and your wisdom. We're so honored to have you with us, with deep bows of gratitude for all you do. And we welcome you now to share your opening words and blessing.
I wish to thank all for this opportunity this morning. I feel so honored and blessed to be here. To begin with, before I enter my blessing, I'd like to take a little bit of time to let you know that I have never done this type of blessing on a Zoom before. It's only when we're really gathered as human beings face to face with our connecting energies. And so it's going to be quite interesting as we work together with ancestral energy and the man-made harness energy of our computers. So I'm asking, for your help wherever you are to hopefully make this really work and be true with our unseen ancestors part. So to begin with, I'd like to ask everyone to acknowledge where you are, as Cynthia had done. If you know whose ancestral land you are in, please acknowledge it. And if you don't, you might want to take a little bit of time to learn where you are and whose territorial ancestral land that you are. It's very, very important for us to start connecting to the ancestral spirits in our places. Everybody has an indigenous root somewhere. Everybody. So in my blessing, I'm actually will be calling in our indigenous ancestors. These are the ones that Creator had given the knowledges to, the how we're supposed to live here on the earth with one another. And they were the ones who knew how to live in peace and harmony. So what we're going to do is ground ourselves and just think, we don't know who they are, but they know who we are. And we're going to ask them if they could surround us and hopefully connect with one another to hear from our hearts, our cry, our wish, to see what has transpired in time passing on the earth, and to guide us to get to that next circle of balance. That's where we're heading. What does our walk look like to get there? The other thing is that I will be doing our blessing in my Tewa language. And so I'm asking that if you have a recorder, that if you would please be respectful and turn it off. If there's any way that we can edit our time together too, and edit out the Tewa part of it. This is the part that is very extremely spiritual. And so respectfully, we need to be grounded in our own energy to hear the words, feel the words, while we're surrounding ourselves with our ancestral energy. It's so vital that we do this daily. When you get up in the morning, ask those spirits wherever you are to guide you. Keep your eyes and your ears and open, to who they send to you. This is so beautiful that people I've noticed that I know, we've done things together over the years, and I'm so grateful that we're here today and continuing our path together. And it's so exciting that there are more people now that are interested in the nuclear issues than when I first started in the 90s. So with that, at this time, if we can pause all recording. Thank you so much for this day. And I have called in our ancestral spirits to be with us. I hope each and every one of us has done the same. And let's just see where they guide us after our time together today.
Thank you, Marian, for honoring us with the words of your Tewa people and ancestors, and gracing us to open this conversation about the place where you live in Los Alamos. So my first question to you, Marian, is we would be deeply honored if you would share with us now about the Tewa world, your sacred ancestral land, what this means to you and the Tewa people, and what have been the impacts of the Los Alamos National Laboratory on the Tewa world, your ancestral land, on the Tewa people, and the surrounding environment.
Okay. First of all, it's the geology of our area. We live in a place where at one time, one of the largest volcanoes on the face of the earth happened here. When it exploded, it threw lava all the way to Chicago. And it was a place where there was ocean and life-forming elements happen with volcanic eruption here on Earth. So first beings happened in this place. Our Tewa territory is from the border of Colorado and New Mexico, west through the Jemez Mountains, to North Albuquerque, the Galisteo Basin, the Sangre de Cristos. This area is our Tewa territory. It is our sacred place that we believe the Creator planted us here to be the caretakers of the gifts of the air, the water, land, and each other. So we are very, very lucky people because we are still living in our place since time immemorial. We have not gone anywhere. Our people had fought to death to stay here when others came here. It is our not a sacred place. It's our church. It's our heaven. When Los Alamos National Laboratory came here, they had a law that they wrote themselves, the War Powers Act, to give themselves permission to plant themselves here. At that time, we were a very self-sustainable people. We planted, we took care of each other's, we fed ourselves. It was a time, and it wasn't that long ago, only 75 years ago, that the United States came here. We were forced into a system of money. We were forced into an education system that was very, very different than how we learned. So they didn't, ask permission, to come here. They just planted themselves here, the Army, and used our people, to do the work, some of the work up there in the canyons. They came here, though, via anthropologists because they knew who we were, what we had, and wanted to preserve, but at the same time, make us Americans. So the plight was changed a little different from the Eastern tribes who were annihilated, and some don't even exist anymore, to, well, maybe we'll keep them around, but at the same time, the nuclear entity was a totally opposite of our belief system. Our belief system is about life-giving, and nuclear is detrimental and disaster and death. Total opposite beliefs. So that's in a nutshell what they did.
Thank you, Marian. So my next question is, you live every day with the devastating nuclear legacy of the Los Alamos National Laboratory, and for over 25 years, you've been dedicated to addressing the health and environmental impacts of the lab on the Santa Clara Pueblo where you live and on the wider region. You recently joined a lawsuit to stop the construction of new plutonium pits at Los Alamos. Please share with us about your work and the role of women in your efforts. What are your greatest concerns, and what next steps are you planning to take? And how can we best support you in your efforts? And what can we start doing right now?
Oh, geez, this is like a lot. One of the first things that Hope, our organization, had done was to get permission from our elders to do this walk, to do this work of how do you feel of Los Alamos National Laboratory being in our sacred place, was our question to our elders. And it just really opened up a door to address the issue. At the same time, the laboratory was very concerned now that the Native people were not liking their existence here. And so they gathered the 4 tribes closest to the laboratory to do agreements with the tribal leaders, all men. So that just furthered the patriarchy. Before European people came to our church, we were a very matriarchally driven village since the very beginning, because it's natural law that you know who your mother is, not necessarily your father. So you always went to the kivas where your mother belonged, until Spanish came to our place and brought last names to further the to bring patriotism. And then the United States government furthered that with the leadership in our villages of being men to making decisions. So time, when people, came here, we adapted. We adapted every time. This last, when the first peoples came here, it took 100 years before our people could fight back, because there was, we didn't know how to kill people. We didn't kill people. We were peacemakers. And it took 100 years before our people got the nerve to do a Pueblo revolt, which only lasted 12 years, and realized that it was a mistake on how to deal with not being ownership of people, not being ownership of land. We are people who are part of the earth, not owners of it, and just different beliefs. And so part of the work, a lot of the work, was just being on the same page of understanding what our United States government, their language is about. And so it was disseminating pertinent information to tribal leaders, reading the environmental impact statements that the Department of Energy had, by law, had to put out before they have their operations or do whatever they're going to do. And so it was reading those books and finding all of the things that had to do with our sacred places and our water resources and all of those kinds of things, and bring them to the attention of the tribal leadership. And it took 12 years before one village actually made comments to an EIS, and it was my own village. And so their attorney worked with me and colleagues and wrote comments, 22 pages of comments with T for the tribe. And because Hope was an organization, we knew what the comments were. So we knocked on doors here in the village, 500 households, and got signatures from the people that supported the tribal council's comments. So that was a big turn where our tribes now had to have a real government to government relationship. It couldn't be consultation. So that opened that door to make that real. They had to come and talk with our villages to say, you know, this is what our plans are. You're in, open the door so where they can actually go on site to see, you know, what's happening. And of course, the money thing where the environment departments were formed in the villages and on. But the work never stopped, you know, they just kept doing this horrible work, and the environment just get worse and worse. We live on a sole source aquifer here in northern New Mexico, and the laboratory is the largest water user and the largest polluter. So, you know, just educating the people over all these years of what it's doing to us, learning about health effects of plutonium and uranium and those kinds of things, knowing that we were planted here to honor the sacredness of these powerful earth elements, and how they were disturbed. Man disturbed them, and all these illnesses and cancers, you know, come about. And they still don't want to take responsibility for it. So part of the work that we want to do is to continue that dissemination of information at this time. And we want to put together packets for our 19 Pueblo nations, part of the Navajo tribe and the two Apache tribes, to be inclusive of what people around the world are doing about this nuclear legacy that we have. And so it's exciting to me, you know, to meet Shannon and Susi and everyone, Colleen, you know, to take a step further in putting our work on the same page, being inclusive of what we've done, and offer what we have, you know, to where voices can be even further heard. And so I'm asking, you know, all of our ancestral, spiritual, unseen energies, you know, to carry these words, these feelings to each other, and to carry them out farther so that they can actually be heard and dealt with in a positive way, to make change, to stop this detrimental thing that's happened on our earth, and hopefully to change the minds, you know, of people that are doing the work. You know, there's other ways to make money. I always tell our young people, be mindful of how you make your money. Be mindful of what classes you take in your college. Be happy with your work. You know, it's terrible where many lab workers can't even talk about their work at the dinner table because it's secret. You know, and what kind of a family dinner, you know, is that? I can go on and on and on and on because there's so much gamut, you know, with what is happening here and has happened. And I believe we're at a place where it has gone full circle. My mentor in pottery had said this to me, that the decision that her grandpa had made, because he was a Kasikia, the elder who had made the decision on we can't fight what's coming when the United States came here via anthropologists, via Los Alamos National Laboratory. We need to become our enemy and pray that our seventh generation will remember who we are. We're there. We are that seventh generation, people. We need to bring back the indigenous wisdoms and incorporate it everywhere in our walk, in our path. You know, it's not even, it's even a teaching to not even have a goal. It's just to be on the path. You know, today is a good path. We're laying out, talking about it, and incorporating it. It's time to do that.
Marian, thank you for allowing us all to be witnesses and to share your hope and joy about us all coming together. It's really a gift. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you one final question, and we have just a couple of minutes before we need to move on to the next speaker, which is you've talked about the importance of using the mannerism of the Tewa people, using life-sustaining energies that offer empowerment and an opportunity for us to enter right relationship with each other on this land. So my question to you, and this is another big question, what would it mean for Los Alamos National Laboratory and the US government to enter right relationship with the Tewa people and your sacred ancestral land? What would restorative justice look like for the devastating harms that have been done?
An apology. I pray that our United States government can offer apology to indigenous people. In 1945, this country that I love, and it's so devastating and embarrassing and detrimental that this country detonated an atomic weapon on their own people. 19 pueblos, 2 Apache tribes, part of the Navajo Nation, Spanish farmers, and Anglo ranchers. That's who was here in New Mexico when the Trinity test happened and didn't tell nobody. Didn't tell us to protect ourselves or anything. And to this date has not said, I'm sorry. We had to live all these 75 years with this ungodly elements, you know, in our water, in our air, in our lives, you know, and being told that, oh, we don't know where these cancers came from. You know, they don't need to lie anymore. We're not stupid. We become our enemy. We've studied, we've learned, we know that it's a lie. They owe an apology just to begin with. And then we need to change our health system because all of us have been exposed. Everybody has been exposed clear around the world with all these above ground tests and stuff. You know, we're all poisoned. Our whole physicians and nurses and system of drugs and all of that, it just needs to really change so that we can be a healthy people, a healthy humans, to be able to eat our indigenous foods, which is our medicines, and to grow healthy with good water and breathing good air, those kinds of things. So restorative justice, you know, requires moving into alignment with the indigenous wisdom of caring for land, air, water, and each other. So that's how I feel.
Marian, I just say that we all join you in this prayer that all of this may be so. And we set the intention now that all of it and more is done to bring restorative justice. Thank you for opening your heart to us like this. And I just want to say that as you started to speak, Tina Cordova, one of our mentors from another session, joined. So Tina, I'm hoping you heard everything that Marian just said, because Tina, if you don't know, those of you on the call, is the co-founder of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium and is dedicating her life to bringing recognition and compensation to people affected by the Trinity test, herself and so many members of her family and community in particular. So just want to acknowledge you and thank you, Tina, for joining us at really the perfect moment when Marian began to speak about what happened at Trinity. And if you want to put your information in the chat so people who don't know about your work can join you in it. Bless you and welcome. Okay, Marian, thank you so much. We're going to move on now to Shannon. And Shannon Biggs, I want to welcome you now as the co-founder and director of Movement Rights, where she works on climate justice with tribes and primarily communities of color to align human laws with the laws of the natural world. In 2017, Movement Rights assisted the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma to make history as the first tribe to recognize the rights of nature in tribal law. Shannon is an internationally recognized leader of the Rights of Nature movement and a co-founder of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. Shannon, from the first time I heard you speak, now almost a decade ago, you've been such a huge inspiration to me, and just the way you show up over and over again. And now just last week, you were there at the White House with your Indigenous brothers and sisters risking arrest for climate justice. So it's really a privilege to welcome you now with the prayer of planting seeds to bring our movements closer together. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Aloha. We've been friends for so long. I'm really honored to be a part of this panel. And Puna, mahalo nui loa for your beautiful opening words. And it's wonderful to see you both again. I'm honored to be on this wonderful, distinguished panel, but I can't, I'm still reveling in the words and the emotions of Marian. I send prayers up to you, to the people of your land, and thank you for and honor you for your ongoing work to protect your territory and your people. Movement Rights, we're based on unceded Ohlone territory in the Bay Area of California. I live in San Francisco, which is unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, and my co-founder of an Indigenous leader, Penny Opal Plant, and I formed Movement Rights, not just to continue our long-standing work around rights of nature, but to specifically work at the intersection of rights of nature, Indigenous rights, and climate justice. It's a very powerful and important place to be. Indigenous wisdom, of course, is at the core and something that links all of our work together. And so it's just really been my honor as a non-Indigenous woman to have the privilege to learn from Indigenous people around the world about how to do this work in an, to indigenize all of the work that we all do. Rights of nature, for those who are unfamiliar with the concept, is often seen as a legal framework, but it's really not. It's also really not new. From civil rights movements to abolitionists to women's suffrage, the advancement of rights in Western legal tradition has never really been about law. Martin Luther King never said, I have a law. It's about coming from a heart place and transforming all of our work, moving from just the cerebral to the heart place to do the work that really needs to be done. At its roots, as I said, rights of nature isn't even new. It is ancient indigenous wisdom of how to live in balance with the earth, and it's couched in a Western legal framework and rights-based law. Indigenous people didn't use those words. Rights are an invention, a Western legal invention, and it's a bridge, that language, rights of nature, to help take us to that indigenous understanding. Indigenous people never needed laws to tell us that rivers have a right to flow, to thrive, to evolve in their natural cycles. And it's no coincidence that even today 80% of biodiversity, or the remaining biodiversity on planet Earth, is in indigenous hands and supported by indigenous rights. So we really have to understand the power of the indigenous cosmology, wisdom that is guiding all of us, not backwards, but into the future. This is really, for me, the way forward, that including this understanding of how to live in balance, and how to, the opposite side of the coin of rights is responsibility. It's really about our human responsibility to the ecosystems that allow us to thrive and to survive. We're just one species of all that is. And in fact, we're one of the newest species, and yet responsible for so much of the destruction of our own ability to live, because of this, hubris of, an idea that that nature is property. We work in a system, our Constitution in the United States and in most places recognizes that nature is property, and property is to be owned and to be commodified and to be used for profit. And that is absolutely, it's the story of separation from the beginning. The indigenous story is one of weaving together and recognizing our natural place to be in right relationship with the system of life. And that's not just, good heart, words from the heart. That's just obvious. We cannot, with every drop of water that we drink, with everything we eat, with every breath we take, we are participating in an interconnected world of relationship. And yet mainstream culture has really fooled us into this idea that not only are we separate as humans, we have our own human rights, and that we have dominion over everything else that is. And our work at Movement Rights is also to help us to cross that bridge through this idea of recognizing rights of nature, that we are not owners of nature. We do not have the right to destroy property by virtue of owning a deed to a piece of land. And we do not have the right to make the world uninhabitable for the generations to follow. I really felt Marian's words about the, the seventh generation. And here we are, and here we stand on the precipice of total, extinction as a species if we don't change the way that we live. And it is an indigenous wisdom that helps to bring us into the future that offers us an actual future. I know you wanted me to talk a little bit about the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth, which is a document that was created in April 2010. Bolivia called together the World People's Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth. And as someone working on the rights of Mother Earth, or the rights of nature, depending on which word you prefer, this global gathering of civil society and governments was hosted by Bolivia in a place called Tiquipaya outside of Cochabamba, Bolivia. And I was invited to put together the president's panel on the rights of nature there. And I was very excited because rights of nature really hadn't had an international stage to that point. And because there were so few, I was one of a handful of people who could talk about rights of nature, which was considered a really crazy idea just 10 years ago. And it's, maybe some people still think lots of people still think it's a crazy idea, but it's an idea that more and more people are taking very seriously. And one of my colleagues, a South African lawyer and author of Wild Law, Cormac Cullinan, was asked to assist in drafting, to bring a piece of paper that was a sort of starting point for the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth. And we all had a chance to offer suggestions for a starting place, but that was mostly thrown out the window when we got there. What ended up happening was there was this huge room and a huge screen where this, document lived. And over the course of a week of from dawn till the darkest of night, Indigenous people from around the world came up one by one, pointed at the screen, and changed the language. And we all know how it is to write by committee, and we've all been there. And so to watch this phenomenon occur, when we write by committee, we all have our very different ideas that we're trying to get in. And often what happens is this weakening or this amorphous document at the end, by the time everybody's ideas are put in there. But watching Indigenous people from so many cultures stand one by one and rewrite this entire document word by word over the course of a week also showed us the similarities, what Indigenous people have always known. There wasn't so much like an argument over one idea or another. It was a universal notion of our relationship. It had a strong critique of colonization, obviously, commodification of nature. It has a strong critique of capitalism, the hubris of mainstream culture to destroy that which gives us life. Indigenous people from wherever they lived, they offered different words and there were things changing, but the idea really wrapped around this document and breathed life into this document. And to watch and witness that happening in real time was one of the most powerful and impactful moments that I, can really recall. And it is the wisdom, it models the wisdom of Indigenous people from around the world to share sort of an operating manual, if you will, for our right relationship with our mother, the earth, the original instructions on care for the only place that we call home. And it's about recognizing our human responsibilities. And it's just a breathtaking document, as it is a powerful document. And I was there at the United Nations in New York when this document, when Bolivia shared this document with the delegates there in a room full of people sitting at desks with microphones, and a panel of our allies speaking the language of harmony with nature, because rights of nature was too strong to begin to introduce there. And as they were all handed a copy of the Universal Declaration, there was a lot of smirking, as you can imagine, as they read this, like, this will never pass. This is never going to be a UN document. Critiquing capitalism, critiquing, the way of life, the way things are in this brazen way. So we have a way, we certainly have a way to go in terms of, that document, which is an aspirational document. It's like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the United States still hasn't signed and ratified. So it is globally no surprise that around the world, it is Indigenous people who lead the work of the rights of nature, because for many of them, they understand that we live in a world of Western law, and we have to flip it. We have to we have to change it from property-based law to one that recognizes our actual human relationship with life. And there is no greater, what is climate change but the earth telling us we've exceeded the limits to what's, to what this one species has done. We're the only species who does this in their home. And to hear Marian's words of the destruction and the value of life that you weren't even given a warning as this occurred. That the way that we treat human beings and people and nature and all of the species, the interconnectedness of life with such disdain is something that is horrifying. But at the same time, we have to remember that this can all be undone. Everything we can undo. Colonization, this country is, as the United States as it stands, is only a couple of 100 years old. We can make these sorts of changes. It's possible, and it's beginning. There are now over, I don't know, I've lost count, well over a dozen countries that have ratified rights of nature, including in the last year, Canada has joined that. Again, Indigenous people leading the way with the rights of, I'm going to use the English word, the Magpie River, because I have not been successful at pronouncing it correctly in the Inuit language. But this is something that is growing from the, many years ago when I first started talking about it and was laughed out of lots of rooms, including the UN, to where we are now. And there is that reason that Indigenous people are rising to lead us, and we have to listen.
Shannon, that was just a beautiful introduction for all of us who don't know about rights of nature. And I loved what you talked about that we have to indigenize all the work we do, that's our work. That's really in my heart. And so we've got just a few minutes more. And so what I'd like to do is to combine maybe question 2 and 3. Just if you could give us maybe one really wonderful, inspiring example of how rights of nature has been implemented to protect an ecosystem, and then move to, since in going back and looking at the Declaration of Mother Earth for the first time in a long time, I saw that nuclear is specifically mentioned in 2 places in terms of radioactive contamination, and that we have the right to live without that and also without nuclear weapons. So I want to really jump to the question of what potential you think, because you work so much on environmental and climate justice, there is to apply rights of nature to the nuclear weapons issue, and how this is intersectional in terms of money and divestment. That's a lot, but I'm just trying to keep us on time.
Yes,
So.
absolutely. I'll do my best to try and I want to tell, I've asked Penny, who my colleague at Movement Rights, my co-founder, who is a tremendous Indigenous leader who started her working for the nuclear freeze in the 1980s. And so I talked to her about this panel because she wasn't able to join us today. And she, said July 16th, 1945. This is the first time humanity obtained the power to destroy all life on Earth, when the first nuclear bomb was tested in the US government Alamo Gordo bombing range in New Mexico. And it is when she was very young, she took her parents, dragged her parents, took her parents to see Helen Caldicott speak at a showing of the film The Last Epidemic. And she told the story of her research of uranium in breast milk, and that she had traced it to grass eaten by cows in Australia, resulting from the French conducting nuclear testing in the South Pacific. So right there, we see the circle of life, everything, coming together, that what we do in one place has impacts everywhere else. And that's certainly mostly, for nothing more true perhaps than around nuclear weapons, nuclear arms. And when she brought her parents, she said water started pouring out of her eyes. And as she walked to the car, and she asked her parents, how could you not tell me? How could you not tell me that nothing could ever be the same again, that we are walking around like things are normal? And she, cried for 4 days straight. And then she began organizing with the Nuclear Weapons Freeze campaign in the early 80s. And in essence, from the Indigenous perspective, the story Helen told was the story of violating the right relationship between humans and the rest of living beings. And, what is climate change but that autoimmune system, the earth, telling us that we're out of balance, and that we have to shift not only our laws, but our culture. And again, the stories of Indigenous people moving forward this rights of nature idea. We took a delegation in 2018, I believe, of Indigenous people from Turtle Island, US, to Aotearoa, New Zealand. Aotearoa is the Maori word for New Zealand, and they're actually soon going to be changing their name to Aotearoa, which is a wonderful thing to me. And the people of the Wanganui River, the Maori, the Iwi, the tribes there, had recognized that, had worked with the government to recognize the rights of the Wanganui River, and that it wasn't owned by the Maori people. It wasn't owned by the government. It owned itself. Because to them, the river is their spiritual ancestor. And as long as that river was in chains, so were they. They have a saying, from the mountain to the sea, I am the river and the river is me. And from this place of passing the recognition of the rights of nature, which they often say, really, we put it in law because we wanted the Pakia or the settler population to understand. This is for them as much as for us. This shift is monumental. It's huge that we can now begin to resume our human responsibilities to our own ancestral territories, the land, the water, the holistic source of life. And in working with at home with Casey Camp Hornick of the Ponca, who's the Ponca Environmental Ambassador, my mentor and leader. Rights of nature had been here in the United States, passed by small white rural communities, and really seen as a trick of the law. And in so doing, Indigenous people of Turtle Island were no longer, we're looking at rights of nature with the skepticism. This is another white man's law. Maybe this is like another broken treaty. It didn't reflect the values, and globally what we're seeing around us was totally different. And Casey was one of the first to say, we understand what this could be, what this can be, what this offers to shift not only culture, but law. We shift culture enough, we shift law, and law shifts culture in a more, more broadly. And she comes from, Casey, in the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma, an area that's what she calls environmental genocide by the fossil fuel industry. You can take a toxic tour of her territory by standing in one place, practically, and just looking around and doing a 360. It is devastating what has happened to the water, the air, the soil, the land. They cannot drink their own water. They cannot, they have to purchase water for their tribe. They cannot grow organic food within 16 miles of their tribal lands. They have a funeral a week for people as a result of fossil fuel related cancers and deaths. And they understood that rights of nature, and recognizing the rights of nature, the rights of climate, the right of their territory to be free from fossil fuel disasters, was a step forward, an important step forward in shifting not only culture, but law, and therefore broad strokes. And now 6 other tribes, which would be higher if it weren't for a year of COVID, year and a half, ongoing COVID. And many, many other tribes are also looking at this. And this is how we transform, in the United States. We can't do what Ecuador did. We're not ready to put something in our constitution. This work comes from the grassroots up, and it comes from the Indigenous world up.
Shannon, thank you so much. There's so much more to learn, and I look forward to having more conversations with you about all of this with a wider circle and bring our movements closer together. I want to move now to Susi Snyder, who I'm going to introduce now to you. She's the financial sector coordinator at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, where she oversees the campaign for divestment. Susi also coordinates the Don't Bank on the Bomb project and is an expert on nuclear weapons with over 2 decades experience working at the intersect between nuclear weapons and human rights. She was named Hero of Las Vegas in 2001 for her work with Indigenous populations against nuclear weapons development, US nuclear weapons development, and nuclear waste dumping. Susi, it's been an absolute privilege to immerse myself in your brilliant work preparing for this session, your path-breaking campaign divestment strategy. Thank you for your devotion, for all you do, and I welcome you now to be with us.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here, and I feel very honored and grateful and humbled to be this quite powerful crowd. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's really sweet.
Well, it's great. And I want to just jump in to the questions with you, that you've been dedicated to the abolition of nuclear weapons for over 25 years. And now you work every day on the divestment campaign. Would love for you to share the story of the campaign, how it evolved, and welcome you to walk us through the details of your strategy and how, step by step, we can begin to do things in our lives to come into right relationship with the banks and the nuclear weapons producers, and how maybe a little bit just about why you're doing this work and how it's really about coming into right relationship for you and for the world.
Well, thanks. I mean, I've been working on nuclear weapons issues for as long as I can remember, really, and it's because a lot of what we heard here. It's this idea that a bunch of guys got together and figured out how to destroy the very essence, the very being, the very physical thing that binds us together. It's the atom. When you split the atom, you destroy everything, and that they thought it was okay. And I have a real hard time with that. I've always had a real hard time with that. And it's painful to me. It's painful to see how that has played out in our human family. It's painful to see how it has impacted the earth, how there is no one who hasn't been touched by nuclear weapons. Everyone has been affected. Everyone has had an impact. And so, but the thing is, when you talk about nuclear policy, like, I mean, I got so frustrated because honestly, everybody's like, oh, you don't know enough. Your lived experience is not relevant to this, or the nuclear policy circles are quite closed and technical and wonky. And what can people do? Like, at the end of the day, you feel really disempowered. Nuclear weapons are so disempowering. And so they're like, what can people do? And everybody, when I ask my neighbors, hey, what do you think about nuclear weapons? I think they're dumb. That's the polite thing that they say. And they think, nobody says, oh, these are great. Everybody has a problem with them. But most people say, oh, but I guess they're like a necessary evil, or, the politicians have to figure this out. I can't really do anything. And I thought, well, actually, people can do things. People change. Shannon was just talking about how law shifts culture, but culture also shifts law. And every time we talk about these as dumb weapons, we're helping to create a change. And when people, if you really don't think that they're a good idea, well, I ask people, can you put your money where your mouth is, and really take divestment as a strategy. We've seen it work with cluster bombs. We've seen it work in the massive anti-apartheid campaign in South Africa. We saw in the history of the nuclear abolition movement, and I'm so grateful to the grandmothers mostly, and the grandfathers, some whose shoulders we stand on, who got General Electric to stop making nuclear bombs. Why? Because they boycotted in the 70s. We looked back at this, and it gave people a thing to do about nuclear weapons. And that's why I like the divestment activity, because overwhelmingly people have some connection to finance, whether it is they have a bank account, or they have a pension somewhere, or they live in a city or a municipality, or connected to somebody who has control over resources and financial resources that are somehow invested. All of these are opportunities. And the great thing about this is, it's not an instant thing, it's a conversation. So it's a conversation that we can all start to have, whether it be with our bank, or I think Anne Frisch is on this call, and she's a Rotarian. Rotary just adopted a policy to not invest in military weapons or nuclear explosives, which, when you put them together, that's nuclear bombs. And why did that happen? It happened because of nice people like the ones that are on this call, who started some conversations. Let's get our money out of this. Let's put our money in things that we believe in. Let's figure out a way, as Marian was saying, let's figure out a way that we can create jobs, we can create energy, we can do work that is good for our communities. And While I may personally have some, deep-seated issues with capitalism, at this point in time, this is a tool for us. And it's a way that anybody can do something and feel good, because it doesn't take a lot of people to make even a big bank change. It just takes a handful of the right conversations. And I believe that when we cut the money off from the companies that have a vested interest, there are 25 companies around the world with a vested interest in keeping nuclear weapons around. They get big contracts, and they pay for lobbyists. They pay, they fund, congressional campaigns. They have a vested interest in keeping these stupid bombs. But when we start to cut off their investment, when we start to stigmatize them as well, when we call out Elayne Drake for taking home $22 million in the year of a global pandemic because Northrop Grumman got a big fat contract for nuclear weapons, we can change things. So, it's a combination of like a good conversation to start stuff, something anybody can do. Anybody can do. You don't have to be an expert. And, we all get to live our passion and live our, and be true to ourselves. And that's why we do the Don't Bank on the Bomb work. And it's something that, I hope a lot of people can connect with.
Thank you, Susie. That was really inspiring, that, anybody can do this. Anybody can talk to their bank. And maybe you just want to tell us a little bit about the banks, that are, how that works, if they're actually making it possible. They're using our money, if we bank with them, to fund, it's actually both fossil fuels and nuclear weapons. So this is where the two really come together. So if you could just talk a little bit about the banks, and then maybe step by step what I would do if I had money at a bank that I wanted to divest. What would I do? What would you recommend that I do, or we do?
Right. So it's true. Banks are funding projects, and they're funding companies that have, I like to call them, nefarious effects on the planet, because they're quite evil intentioned, and I like words like that. It makes me think of comic books. Anyway, but what they do is they take our money. They take the money that we put in a savings account. They take the money in a checking account. They use it because when it's sitting in the bank, the bank's like, oh, we have to make some money, so they invest it either by lending to big corporations. Those corporations need loans to get the big contracts. They need this general corporate purposes financing to be able to do the research and development, to get the big nuclear weapon contract, to be able to make sure that they have plenty of cash on hand to push back and fight the water protectors, right? They need that money. And so our banks are taking our money and lending it off, and then getting for whatever interest that they're trying to get back on those loans. They also take the money and they invest it in stocks or in bonds, and they try to make a profit. They're like, ooh, maybe Lockheed Martin is going to turn a profit next year, or Boeing. Maybe Boeing's going to turn a profit. Well, let's invest and buy a bunch of Boeing stocks so that we can then earn more money, and we can use that for other things. The thing is, we have, as a client of a bank, we have a say in where our money goes. And whether it be, if we have an investment account, we have a big say. We can say very clearly to the bank, do not invest my money in companies that are involved in these nefarious industries, that are involved in creating existential threats, that are involved in climate change, that are involved in nuclear weapons. Every single bank that I have come across has a product for clients that does not have any involvement in these kinds of companies. They have these sustainability funds, or they say that we have a high environmental, social, and governance rating. They say that they really want you to believe everything they say without checking, and please don't. It's always good to question things, but they do offer products. So as an individual, one thing that people can do is first we have a website called don'tbankonthebomb.com. And that website, there's a section, who invests. It's a little tab, and you can listen. You can see, is my bank on that list? And if they are, what I always tell people is, I don't know how you talk to your bank. If you have an online banking, or you use an app on your phone, or you go into the local branch, whatever it is, there's a feature to send them a message, to ask them a question. Why are you investing in nuclear weapon producers? Just start the question. Ask. And that the person who's answering that question, who's responsible on the other end, or the artificial intelligence that's designed to generate a response for you, won't have an answer. They have to ask and ask and ask. And what we did a couple of years ago, we got people to go into branches of BNP Paribas. It's a big French bank. They have tons of investments in the French nuclear weapons program. And they have branches all over the world. So in 45 countries, people knocked on the door at BNP Paribas and said, hey, can you tell me about why BNP Paribas is investing in nuclear weapons? And they didn't know what to say. So all of a sudden, BNP Paribas had to send a memo to 175,000 employees explaining how they see nuclear weapons, explaining what the steps they are taking to make sure that the investments they have in these companies, it's primarily Airbus, doesn't actually go to nuclear bombs, just to the nuclear missiles. And it's sparked this huge debate within the bank itself, and led to them taking stronger steps to prevent future involvement in nuclear weapon producers. And that was because people went and asked the question. When I travel, I go into local bank branches wherever I go. I'm a pretty direct and forward, I'm not too shy. And I go in and I ask people straight up, I ask the bank teller, hey, does your bank have a policy on nuclear weapons? And they say no. I say, can I have a card? Here's mine. And can you follow up and ask your boss? And again, we start conversations. It's starting conversations like that that has changed policies since the earlier this year, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons went into effect, right? So nuclear weapons are now comprehensively illegal. They're prohibited. It's amazing. I'm so proud and honored that this is a reality. And since then, I've been getting calls from banks all over the world saying, oh my gosh, we have branches in countries that have joined the treaty. What are we going to do? What are the companies we need to divest from? How do we get out of this? And we're seeing a change. We're seeing this impact. And these are banks in countries that have nuclear weapons. These are banks in the US. These are banks in the UK. These are banks in France. They're saying, what can we do? And so they're slowly starting to make changes. Again, nothing happens overnight. When Marian talked about the looking ahead to the 7th generation, this is something I think we can finish in this generation. I believe that we can end nuclear weapons in this generation, but only because of the work of all the generations that came before us. So I'm so inspired today to think about this and to make these links, because there's so many people working. The financial sector has recognized their role in doing more. Like, they see it, they know it, and they know it because people are pushing. And those are our brothers, our sisters, they're cousins. We're working together to make this change happen. And it's just, I truly believe that we are changing. And when I'm here in this amazing group, oh my gosh, I feel so hopeful. And I know that we're going to do it.
Well, listening to all of you, I just have tears in my eyes, and I'm so excited to hear about all the progress that's been made since the treaty has entered into force. I was hoping that you would have that good news for us, and I know that New York City passed a resolution to divest its pension fund, and I know it's kind of delayed because of COVID, but that we can actually also go and take action in our cities. We can get our elected representatives to sign on to the treaty. We can get our cities to divest and get our country involved. So I'm going to put those links in the chat, but if you could just speak a little bit to that. I see that Ambassador Whyte has now come into the waiting room, so we're really pleased to see you here. Ambassador Whyte, will be introducing you in a moment. But if you could talk a little bit about that, and then just maybe touch on, how you see us coming together with Shannon's movement and the climate justice movements. And you've spoken a little bit about that, but I know it's a lot to ask.
There's so many different things we could do. It's great. So in New York City, there's a supermajority within the New York City Council supporting legislation that would divest all 5 New York City pension funds from companies involved in the production of nuclear weapons. Now, the collection of New York City pension funds is within the top 10 wealth owners of the world, right? It's huge. It's huge. And so this is quite a big thing. And so the reason that they're doing this, it's on hold because of COVID and because New York was hit really bad. It's been bad. But there's a super majority, and so it's just a matter of getting it onto the agenda, and it's going to go through. Other cities are following up from pledging to support the ban treaty with similar discussions. Cambridge, Massachusetts is one. Santa Barbara, California is another that has done this. The state of Massachusetts has legislation pending about the whole state pension funds. And this is something that can really, it can keep going places. We're also seeing others who are joining in. The Church of England, for example, the Synod of the Church of England said, we will not allow any of our investments. And churches hold a lot of wealth around the world. And they're also taking this position, which is great. Similarly, hopefully the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops will adjust its teachings to not allow any investments in nuclear weapon producers as well. But it's something that cities can do. They can follow up from what they have done if they support the ban treaty, or it's a way to, again, have that conversation within the city. And this is where, when you look at the climate activists, the climate justice activists who have worked so hard to get cities to commit to the Paris Agreement, recognizing the impact on cities and municipalities of climate change, well, that's the slow burn, and nuclear weapons are the quick burn. And so we are really on two sides of the same coin here, and that coin has to come out of these industries, go back into our pockets, or get invested in things that are good for our communities directly. It's a great way to move forward. And we just saw Harvard just said it would divest its endowment from climate change, which are from fossil fuels, which is huge. Brown followed less than a week later. The universities in the US are tipping. And this is also important because universities, especially in the US, are extremely tied to the nuclear weapon industry. They get a lot of funding from nuclear weapon industry. I know in New Mexico, for example, there are targeted programs, particularly within the 19 Pueblo nations, part of the Navajo nations and Apache Nation that Marian was talking about, specifically to get kids to work at the lab. And we have to shift that, because there's good things that could happen there, like decommissioning, like protecting the water. How do we protect the water? And that takes a similar scientific and technological and engineering background to protect instead of harm. And so that's part of the transformation. And that's where I think we're looking at transforming and taking a radical transformation to health, to wellness, to be in right relationship with one another and the earth. And part of that is finding friends and allies and buddies to do it.
Thank you, Susie, for tying that all together so beautifully and inspiring us in all the ways that we can take action to move the treaty forward and through divestment, et cetera. So happy. And I just want to now move to Ambassador Whyte, who has just joined us on a very, very busy day of teaching. We're so happy to have you back. And I'm going to introduce you for those who don't know you. Welcome. Ambassador Elayne Whyte Gomez is a diplomat and academic. She previously served as the former ambassador from Costa Rica to the United Nations in Geneva. In 2017, Ambassador Whyte presided over the proceedings of the United Nations conference that negotiated and adopted the landmark treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Facing extraordinary time pressure and at times contentious debate, Ambassador Whyte facilitated the adoption of this landmark agreement by a vote of 122 nations in favor, 1 against, and 1 abstention. Among her many accomplishments, Ambassador Whyte is also the first woman and the youngest person ever to serve as Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs in Costa Rica. We're thrilled to have you back, Ambassador Whyte, and to look at, all the exciting things that have happened with the treaty since you were last with us last year on the UN at our inaugural session on the UN Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. The treaty is entered into force. Would love for you, welcome, first of all.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure for me to be joining you. I am sorry that I cannot spend more time with you, but I cannot not join you. And I want to commend you for your work and your energy in keeping this work not only alive but growing, really growing. We are going to succeed, and we are succeeding, and we are seeing a lot of progress, which is really really touching to see this progress.
Well, I'm gonna thank you. Welcome again. We're just gonna jump right into the questions with you in the interest of time. And we heard from Marian Naranjo about the indigenous wisdom of entering into right relationship with one another in the earth. And for me, that TPNW is all about that. It really touches on so many things that we've talked about. It's the first to address the catastrophic humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons. And as we've talked before about the disproportionate impact on indigenous peoples, et cetera. And it also includes the clause, the elimination or irreversible conversion of all nuclear weapons related facilities. So with Marian's speaking to us today, right there from around Los Alamos and the devastating impact that laboratory has had on the Pueblo people. If you could share a little bit with us about how the Indigenous Peoples Clause made it into the treaty, and also how the implementation of this conversion clause, the elimination of facilities clause, how you would see that playing out as the treaty enters into force in various places. How would that be implemented?
Yes, well, thank you very much. And again, very nice to be joining you from Costa Rica. Let me tell you that I do have the recollection of the session in which the issue was first introduced about the impact, the overwhelming impact of nuclear weapons testing and everything about nuclear weapons on indigenous populations, on women and girls. And that was a discussion that was introduced during the evaluation of the preambular section of the treaty. And countries like Ecuador, that we know that has an important indigenous population, raised the issue, and it was part of those aspects that just need to be there. So I don't recall that there was any opposition debate about that. It is one of those things that is just obvious that it has to be in this treaty, and so was the inclusion of the impact of nuclear weapon spending on overall development, on the development of the whole world. So those are provisions that are absolutely necessary to be imprinted in an instrument of the 21st century, because it really compiles all the knowledge that we have gathered throughout the decades and throughout the years. So actually, I wanted to highlight another aspect that is somewhat interconnected, but because we are now in this time and age, our main challenge, I think, as humanity is to be able to connect the dots. right? Because we have spent at least the last 75 years of the history of the international system. We have spent 7 decades creating mechanisms and knowledge and doctrine, but those processes have been very focused and very focused on each area of knowledge: the environment, human rights, development, health. And what we need at this moment is to be able to promote and consolidate this systemic approach. And as I said, to put the dots together. And this is what I want to highlight, this very recent development in which actually my country was engaged for many years, which is that the Human Rights Council just adopted a resolution that recognizes that access to a healthy and sustainable environment is a universal right. So in doing so, it has stated a new standard, a new line, a new principle of conduct. It reflects a new aspiration. It is important to mention that already around 155 states already recognized at the domestic level the access to a healthy environment as a human right. But there was not a recognition at the international level. And according to what the United Nations Environmental Program has stated, this act of this global recognition helps in the implementation and protection of the human right to safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. But at the same time, I think it will give traction to not only to the recognition of the right to a healthy environment, but also it will give traction to the overall movement to put the protection of human rights at the center of the environment at the center of the concerns of the international community. And in that regard, it also recognizes or acknowledges the rights to seek, to receive, and to impart information, to participate in the conduct of government, public affairs, in the right to participate in environmental decision making, the right to an effective remedy, which is vital for the protection of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. So I invite those of us working on issues such as the impact of nuclear testing, to put an example, on indigenous populations and the environment of the territories that are inhabited by indigenous populations, to connect the dots and to go to this other ecosystem, which is the human rights ecosystem and the environmental ecosystem, to be able to put the pieces together and to give more traction to the work that is being done, to just to give to have more information, more traction to the moment in which these issues are going to be discussed at the meeting of states parties, and to be able to generate informed decisions for the meeting of state parties to take decisions that are good for the indigenous peoples, good for the planet, and good for the international community, and for the TPNW also as a regime.
That's right. That it's so inspiring to hear about this development and the potential for these things to all intersect and come together and support and reinforce each other, which is what I'm hearing from you. And so I think I think I'd like to move to the next question then about the states parties. If you could just tell us, for those who don't know on the call, the treaty entered into force, what this means, and about the upcoming meeting of the states parties and what the aspirations are, and what do you think is going to be achieved? What do you predict, especially in light of what you've just shared?
Exactly. Okay, in addressing the issue of the impact and the significance of the treaty, let us recall that the current world order, or the current nuclear order at the global level, has 9 states that possess nuclear weapons, the 13,000 nuclear warheads that exist right now in the world, thousands of which are in state of alert and can be triggered in any moment in a matter of minutes. But there are also more, well, actually, the countries that voted in favor of the treaty, 122, are part of a global community of states that have completely and forever renounced the possibility of seeking security through nuclear weapons. So the first impact of the entry into force of the treaty is that as of January of this year, there was a reaffirmation, reconfirmation, reinforcement of the renouncement of nuclear weapons on the part of the greatest majority of the international community. This is very important because, of course, we have heard criticism from different sectors, especially from the countries that are still in the nuclear deterrence paradigm. But the first message that is being sent is that countries are reinforcing that renunciation at the global level, something they did at the non-proliferation treaty, and also in regional treaties, where by which the regions have declared entire continents as nuclear weapon-free zones. So this is the first. So this is the first part. The other message, which I think is fundamental as well, is that we are in the 21st century. What we are discussing at this moment about the existential threats that are faced by humanity mean that, as Jacob Kellenberger, the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, mentioned back in 2010, it is already time for the interests of states to yield to the interests of humanity. And what this means is that the treaty is an instrument through which the voice and the interests of humanity are being expressed. And this is absolutely central, because in the 21st century, we need to complement the international negotiations and debates with the negotiations for humanity, where in the areas in which being a nation state does not make a difference, because we need the whole of humanity to be working together towards guaranteeing that we are going to survive these existential threats. So that is the second very important message, that there was a channel through which the voice of humanity was heard and was codified in a prohibition of nuclear weapons. And I say so also because of the strategic importance and participation of civil society and citizens around the world in the negotiations. First, in bringing the negotiations to a fruition, or to obtain the negotiation mandate, but also because of the role that they played in the negotiations, in permanently reminding the state representatives of what the interests of humanity are, those interests of humanity that are not bound by boundaries. And so the third aspect that I would like to mention regarding the first meeting of state parties is that every regime this is my view and my reflection after I have seen several regimes, treaty regimes, is that the first 5 years of a treaty regime are the most strategic ones, to be able to give life to the words that are in the text of the treaty. And the first meetings of state parties are of fundamental importance to continue having the substantive conversations that the treaty contains. And I say this because we have another challenge, since the first meeting of state parties usually is the meeting where we create the institutional framework for the regime to keep on functioning. Either we create a secretariat, then we look at financial issues, subsidiary bodies. So I think the most important aspect that we consider when we see that the meeting of state parties, the first one for this treaty, is approaching, is that we focus our attention on the discussion of the substantive issues and avoid being trapped in the discussion of the administrative issues, which is something that other regimes have faced. And much energy many times goes into discussing this administrative stuff. So there are two aspects. I think there are strategic that we accomplish. First of all, there is a task that was actually very specifically assigned to the first meeting of states parties, which is to define what would be a reasonable time frame for the moment in which a nuclear state decides to join the treaty and is bound by the treaty provisions to destroy its nuclear arsenal and the facilities, as you were mentioning. There is a time frame. This cannot go forever. This cannot be like 100 years or just being in the process of attempting to accomplish the total elimination. So we need to have a time frame. And the reason why this time frame was not set up during the conference is because we thought that we needed more time to be able to revert back to science and experience and seeing what learned lessons we could obtain from other process of dismantling both warheads and facilities. And now we are in a position, because we have been speaking with science and scientists, and we have been looking at other experiences that exist of the elimination of nuclear arsenals or reduction in the case of the US and the former Soviet Union. So we need to have the possibility to receive from the scientists or that knowledge to be able to set a time frame. It could be 10 to 20 years, and with the possibility of an extension. Those are possibilities that are being discussed. So this is absolutely fundamental that we complete and actually comply with this specific task. The other aspect that I think is going to be fundamental is that we decide how the scientific community and civil society are going to keep on being involved with this regime, so that we constantly hear their voices and we constantly are guided by their advisory opinion. Then, of course, the rest of the substantive issues are going to be subject to discussions, and in this regard, I would like to encourage civil society organizations and indigenous peoples to organizations to submit working papers for the discussion of how this new regime can address the provisions of environmental remediation and victim assistance, which is of fundamental value and one of the most important characteristics of this treaty. So submit papers, start working on what you think should be the discussion of this these aspects in the meeting of state parties.
Ambassador Whyte, that was also illuminating for me, and I didn't realize that it sounds like it's such a democratic, inherently democratic treaty that you're inviting is anyone, or just the states parties countries, or can anyone submit these working papers who's from civil society or indigenous communities that are not parties to the treaty? Like if Marian wanted to do something with Los Alamos, the communities around Los Alamos, can they submit a working paper?
Yes, okay, let us remember that the meeting of states parties does have to approve rules of procedure. But in the meantime, when up until the moment in which the specific rules of procedure are adopted, the meeting of states parties is going to still refer to the rules of procedure that guided the works of the conference, the negotiation conference. So the rules still need to be decided upon, but it is very difficult to see a scenario in which civil society organizations are not going to be able to express their voice. It is something that is, of course, going to be there's going to be a platform for the civil society organizations to convey concerns, ideas, proposals. They can do it by also organizing side events during the time that we'll have allocated during the discussions of the conference, and also they can do it through states, member states. They are going to be there taking the floor, usually my suggestion for this process to be as effective as possible is to be able to reach out to the member states with proposals and lines of thought and reasoning that can be discussed. As I said, for a meeting of state parties that is going to be just like in the middle of the COVID, almost going out of the pandemic dynamics, but still it is going to be a very short meeting, not like the normal meetings of states parties because of that reason. So there are going to be time constraints, and it's not going to be in like a normal meeting with, let's say, of a whole week length of discussions. So we have to prepare for that kind of interaction and start. As I say, that's why I said I encourage you to start thinking about processing papers and proposals and start discussing. The meeting will have to approve the rules of procedure. We'll have to agree on some sort of administrative support. We'll have to decide upon the time frame for the elimination of the nuclear arsenals, according to Article 4. And so there's going to be a lot on the plate of the meeting of state parties. So I would encourage you to start reaching out, and also to have in mind that we have a 5-year process, and that is, you know, when we talk about regime, 5 years is nothing, because we are talking about regimes that are good for decades or for history. So to have in mind what we can achieve in the first meeting of state parties and in the following meetings up until the 5th meeting, which is going to be the review conference. This is to say that there are some issues that will need more discussion to be able to be subject to a decision. And part of what many of us can do is to start thinking about how to inform those discussions so that they become mature enough to be ready for discussion, for adoption of decisions, either in the first one or in the succeeding MSPs.
Thank you. That's all really helpful to understand what lies ahead in the next year. And I know we're coming to being short on time. Ambassador, when do you need to leave exactly? When does your next class start?
Well, I have up until 15
Okay.
the hour.
Well, I'm just going to say that if anyone is able to stay longer, we'll just continue. I don't know how the other mentors are doing with time. Susie, Shannon.
And anyhow, we can do one more question if you have. I
Okay.
think
Okay.
that
Well, I wanted to just let's see, the question of when you left us last year, you left us with the words, history is made by every single step we take every day. That it's made by people all over the world. They're not experts necessarily, they're not diplomats, but it's really, that's how we make history. And so you spoke about the role of women's leadership also. And so I just wanted to ask you, following what Susie said, what we as citizens can do. And you've talked a little bit about this already, but how to advance the treaty, especially in the places like the United States, the 9 nuclear armed states who haven't come onto the treaty yet, and where you see possibilities for us. Maybe you could end on that note, would be really helpful.
Thank you. I think you have touched upon a very strategic, important concept, which is the word citizenship. It is the hope for all matters that are being discussed at the global level that citizens' awareness is going to lie at the basis of everything that is subject to progress in today's society. But also we have to acknowledge that citizenship is not exerted in the same manner all over the world, or the same level of freedom of expression, or the same access to independent information. So we need to also reach out to citizens in countries where they have a perception that nuclear weapons are necessary and important for the security of that society. And that is, of course, I know, a very, let's say, it's a big challenge to be able to reach out to citizens. But also we are seeing that we were listening to Susi and the great progress that is being achieved by also working at the subnational level, dealing with not only with stakeholders and actors that actually can have an impact, not only governments, but companies. The financial sector is fundamental to work with the financial sector. To work with subnational governments, cities, and parliaments. Also, there are a couple of world organizations that gather parliamentarians, not only the Interparliamentary Union, but also, I think this one called Parliamentarians for Global Action, and there might be other groups. So let us identify different stakeholders that can help us spread the word about the danger to see citizens in different parts of the world still perceiving that the security of peoples can be attached to the perception of weapons and to the perception of threatening the possibility to threat or to use horrendous weapons on other people. So we have to reach out to societies where there is more freedom, and societies where there is not as much as many possibilities to have access to independent information. That I would say is fundamental. And this is very interesting. This week in the United States, General Colin Powell passed away, unfortunately, rest in peace. And this has been a moment in which people are bringing back things that he said, being a general, being a military man. And I want to put these two phrases of his to us. One of them is, he said, "I am a warrior, therefore I don't like wars." And the other one is that he said that nuclear weapons could not be used. They could not be used. So it was something that just we might as well just try to get rid of, because they cannot be used for everything that we know now about their impact. The other aspect I think is fundamental is that those of you who follow the conference or were there, His Holiness Pope Francis delivered a message to the negotiators at the conference, in which, among other things, he highlighted that everything is interconnected. Everything is interconnected. So this systems approach, this ecosystem, we have one planet, one humanity. We need to make sure who represents the voice and the interests of humanity in this conversation. And I think the interest of humanity at this moment and in terms of nuclear weapons are twofold. First of all, humanity needs to eradicate the threat, the risk of nuclear weapons being used. And that is the reason why we need to eliminate. And the second interest of humanity is how the world's and the humanity's resources are utilized. Let us remember this. During the pandemic, this is unacceptable. During the pandemic, global production fell, global GDP fell by 4%. But military expenditure grew 2.6%. It is unacceptable for humankind to have these figures. And this is where we have to come together as citizens to have those two interests very clearly stated. No risk of annihilation, and where do we put the resources? We don't want to see the whole world spending 2.6%. I mean, continuous growth in military expenditure when the whole world is not has pretty much stopped growing. And this is part of the two messages that are fundamental. And the third one, that the perception that nuclear weapons bring security is wrong. And it is wrong for all humanity. If it is wrong for all humanity, it is certainly wrong for one state or one society.
Thank you, Ambassador Whyte, for those very inspiring closing words. You know, you talk so eloquently about the redefinition of security and nuclear weapons not being any part of that in any legitimate way any longer. And that's what this treaty is doing, and bringing everyone's voices, the voices of civil society and humanity. And also your words that Pope Francis shared. Your words that Pope Francis shared about everything being interconnected really come full circle with how we started with Marian, and the everything being connected with the earth and there being no separation, which Shannon mentioned, and also then Susi followed up. So I just want to begin to close our session now and say that it's been very illuminating. I'm so grateful to you, Ambassador, to you, Marian, to you, Shannon, to you, Susi, for joining us today and sharing your wisdom and inspiring us with your work and what we can do next, and how we can make a difference. And I want to thank all of you from all over the world who have joined us here to be with us, for claiming your seat at the table and for joining us to change our nuclear story. And I just want to see if Puna is still with us, Auntie Puna, just to close the circle. She had a medical situation in her family and is about to board a plane. So, Auntie Puna, are you with us? And I'm getting,
Yes, I am.
oh,
I'm
great.
not sure if you can hear me.
Okay, well, we
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and I'm just gonna
Believe
say,
it or not.
I'm just gonna say, if you want to just close our circle before you board the plane, and then I'll put some links and make some announcements in the chat for everyone, but if you could.
Hi, aloha again to all of you. Thank you for coming. And I look forward to seeing you all again. Blessings.
Thank you, Auntie. Blessings for your journey to Oahu with Kahile. May you be well. I just want to say that we're going to be taking a break and we're going to be coming back in the new year with Women Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy. And in the meantime, I want to put some links in the chat if you want to learn more about our mentors. They're on our website and their incredible work. You can see their resources on our website. And Tom, if you can put those links in the chat, that would be great. And we also have a survey for this session. Would love to hear your response. And I want to thank also, in addition to our incredible speakers, deep bows of gratitude to all of you, Tom Dawson for your tech support in the session, managing it so nicely, Colleen Moore for doing your social media sharing. And again, for all of you for joining us. I'm so deeply grateful and I've learned so much from everyone here today. Thank you so much for being with us and for all of your gifts of your wisdom. Blessings to you all. Aloha.